Good evening. Welcome to Investigator News, and this is Corruption Files. And tonight we're going to do another episode of Boys on the Tracks. And the reason why I'm doing Boys on the Tracks is maybe you'll start connecting the dots of what we see today in a city that we don't understand why prosecutors don't prosecute, judges don't judge right, why crime is so rampant in all of our cities across America. And how does this happen? Well, we start to see it with the Boys on the Track. Now, to kind of review, we went over when the Clintons were in college, and they seemed to have corrupt ways. They were basically getting together with the Black Panthers, with Fallon, with Whitey Bulger, and those that were radical liberals, Marxists, fascists. We've seen them go into getting married, how corrupt they started becoming in Arkansas, and how they put people in place in the right places, in the right spots, to cause a city to cover up crimes that were being committed. And not only that, but a murder. And unfortunately, the boys just stumbled into something that they never should have. Was it a blessing or was it a curse? A curse for the family. A blessing that we were able to find out what the Clintons were finally doing in Arkansas. We learned with Barry Seal that Arkansas was the hub for drugs for the rest of the country. We learned that the CIA, the FBI. Now, I want to blame the Senate and Congress, and only because there is proof. It's all over YouTube, all over the internet, that there was many hearings on what was going on in Arkansas, even Iran-Contra. And when MENA was mentioned, it was always to go in the skiff behind closed doors, where no one could hear what was being said. And as I read through the CIA files, you could see that many were involved. And it wasn't just involved in the Boys on the Tracks. It was the fact that they were all covering up one big issue, that they were all involved in trafficking drugs, human trafficking, child trafficking, everything from that could go across our borders, they made sure it came across. And of course, you have to have open borders to be able to continue the corruption. And what are we seeing today? You guys are seeing a larger scale of what the Clintons did to Arkansas in the 80s and 90s. And we were silenced. When the Clintons went to Washington, D.C., and he became president, we became silenced. There was no internet. The media were basically mum. They did not say nothing, nor would they let us say anything. Everything that we had even tried to go to mainstream media, the Hill, the New York Times, the Post, any place we could even try to get to, we were hushed. We were told, shh, be quiet, it's the Clintons. And so, I did reach out. I got out to Rush Limbaugh and Alex Jones, and they did listen to a point, but it was so crazy, so chaotic, so much chaos that was going on in Arkansas. How could you possibly believe us when there's so much going on that it seems like a tinfoil hat conspiracy? But no, it wasn't a conspiracy. And as we see, the Clintons went on to Russia, 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 and did the same thing. It's so chaotic. It's so crazy. It's so way out there. The tinfoil hat conspiracy. But now we're finding out it was all true. And we're finding out it's all true about what the Clintons have been doing for 40, 50 years, 60 years. Um, so tonight, I really wanted to get into the documents and tell you. You might think this is a little backwards because we hear about the boys and everybody. I've done the boys on the track so many times that you don't have to rehash gruesome to hear gruesome. There's no understanding gruesome, and it is horrible. And it could give someone nightmares if you just keep going over and over and over and over again. Uh, every time I hear a train, I think of the boys because I've been through it so many times. And so tonight, and as we go through the boys on the track once again, we're getting to the final stages, believe me. And you'll start seeing that what is going on when there's a murder in a city and it's got to be covered up. This is how they do it. This is exactly how they do it. And so to go over what we did with the boys, we knew that they were said to have smoked 20 or 10 or however many marijuana joints. And they laid on the track to see what it felt like to be hit by a train, which is they found out was wrong. We had an out of control coroner that was covering up things for the Clintons, and he was way out there. Anybody that hears of how he decided on some cases think it's just crazy of what he was doing, and that is Falmy Malik. To Jocelyn Elders that went on to Washington. She knew. To everyone that was at the Rose Law Firm, Hubble, Vince Foster, um, Ron Brown, Mueller, Comey, bunches of them. So tonight, really, um, when we look at the boys on the track, yes, they didn't do a very good investigation. And why? Because the cops that investigated was the cops that were out there on the track that night. Um, and why would we think they would all cover this up? Why would they cover up just boys being on the tracks and maybe a drug drop? Why? I mean, they could have just shooed the boys away and drove off. There was one thing that a lot of people really haven't said when they do the boys on the track is those men were there that night to pick up those drugs. They were there not only to watch to see if somebody was going to interfere, or take away their profit, but it was to pick up the drugs. And who told them to pick up the drugs? Was it George Bush? No. We know George Bush was part of this. We knew Reagan, but Reagan was far gone by then. This is 1987, folks. What was the reasoning? What was the whole reasoning of this? Why did they make a big deal out of this? It's to cover up for what? What was so big and so bold that they had to cover all of this up? And it's called William and Hillary Clinton. They're responsible for this. And it has been said, no witnesses. And that's Hillary. No witnesses. They're not only did these gentlemen that night know about this, their friends knew about it, people that work for them knew about it, no witnesses. And when it comes to evidence, you shred. You shred and you shred and you shred until there's nothing left to shred. Isn't that what Oliver North said at the Iran-Contra hearings? We just shredded. We were just told to shred. And when they talked to his secretary, We were just shredding. We were just shredding everything. We were told to shred everything that was there. See? And with electronics, you just smash them with a hammer back then. 1987, you just smashed everything. And back then, it was rotary dial phones or the push button phones. So who cares? All you do is shred your phone bills. Back then, you couldn't trace it. So it was so easy to cover up back in those days. It's not so easy now. So tonight, I think you guys are going to be in for a treat. I think you'll start learning what exactly what has happened in Arkansas, and with Kevin and Kevin Ives, Don Henry, and their murders that covered up that followed ever so quickly. Um, it, that's what they thought. They covered it all up so quickly, and they shredded, and everything was good. But the one thing they didn't count on was the people of Arkansas knowing from the early 70s on how corrupt these people were and how corrupt Benton was, how corrupt Saline County was. Not only that, but how corrupt police officers were. Um, so now, on August 23rd, 1987, um, Kevin Ives and Don Henry were murdered in Alexander, Arkansas. In a further act of brutality, their bodies were placed on the railroad tracks in an attempt to cover up their murders. And fast forwarding to 1995, we can see in an FBI document a cover up investigation existed within law enforcement. We've had a very thorough look into such documents that all point to the same direction. And you'll find a lot of those documents in parts, um, though three of the um, Murder of the Track series. You guys, if you're watching this for the first time, you can go to Carnage on Ice and you can watch every one of these documentaries. You could see the documents I'm telling you about, and you'll get even more information than you ever thought. But you got to take your time. You got to watch these things because you'll pick up key points that you'll say, you know what, they're doing that to us now. Wow, yeah, hey, they're doing that to us now. Um, and as the documentation that implicates some of law enforcement officials not only being implicated in the cover up, but also being implicated in actual murders themselves. And we've also learned how the cover ups have reached not only the state level, but the federal level. And how do we know that? Because there are FBI documents, there's CIA documents, there are State Department documents. It goes all the way up to Hillary Clinton's 33,000 emails. And so, as we look back in time and have a look at what is known in the case in its earliest stages and compare to what was discovered later on, um, you start to see the connection between the what Barry Seal started. But when he died, we thought it was all finished. And unfortunately, when the boys were murdered, we then in Arkansas found out the hub hadn't went away. The drugs and the human trafficking haven't went away. It got worse. Were they still at Mina? A little bit, but they had moved north and they found other airstrips in the state that they could use. There is documents and the footage that we've looked at. And one of the biggest pieces of evidence that we have, it came about on television's Unsolved Mysteries that had Kevin and Don's story. And when you look at the original Unsolved Mystery episode, it aired October 12th, 1988. And it gives you an idea of what was going on up to the point of time. Although the boys were murdered at the end of August in 87, it took another 7 long months until 88 to get a real investigation started. And how horrible is that for the families? For so long. And from the very beginning, the men that were involved were part of the cover up. Ironically enough, we'll see it. And would-be prosecutors, Dan Harmon, Richard Garrett, that would be leading the investigation, and what authorities knew at the time. In light of this new evidence, the grand jury changed its ruling from probable homicide to definite homicide. Now, Karen, our moderator, she's in our chat room. I think she's learning a lot for the first time. This is documents I have received recently that get into a better explanation of what happened to those boys. And when we had the grand jury investigation, they weren't allowed to finish because the judge stopped it and said no. And he made a ruling that it was to basically be stopped. Now, Richard Garrett, the deputy prosecuting attorney of Saline County, he portrayed himself and came across one of the good guys just trying to solve the murder of Kevin and Don. And from an FBI document in the early 1994, they could see where Richard Garrett aired and appeared on Unsolved Mysteries, which is just he got on there and he really wanted to help the family. He requested that individuals that had any type of tips to please call in. And then actually, we didn't see Richard Garrett requesting individuals to call. It just said if you had tips to call the state. And so what we found out and quickly noticed at one of the top of the FBI written documents in 94, it states that Dan Harmon, a local attorney, and Richard Garrett, deputy prosecuting attorney for Saline County, approached the victim's parents. And this would be back in 1988. Regarding the discontent with the rulings, Harmon offered to act as counsel for the families shortly thereafter. Now, Dan Harmon, let me see if I can give you an idea of who we're talking about. So here we have Dan Harmon, Kirk Lane, and John Cole. John Cole was the judge on the cases. Anything that was brought before Bill Clinton made sure that John Cole was in charge of these proceedings. Kirk Lane, I haven't mentioned him yet, but I know I've just mentioned Dan Harmon. Dan Harmon, he was certainly on the tracks that night. In fact, he was seen with blood on him. And we'll learn a little bit more as we go along tonight. But he went to the parents, and he went to the families shortly after, and he requested the family really push the issue that he's appointed special prosecutor. And at the end, the case by Saline County, Arkansas, Judge Cole further, the Little Rock FBI investigation reveals that Benton Chief of Police Rick Almendorf, and then Judge Cole and Dan Harmon were at Judge Cole's residence when Dan Harmon suggested that he be made special prosecutor for the Ives and Henry case. Now you can see what just happened, folks. Dan Harmon was a part of this, and so was a few others that were with them that night. And what better way to cover up a crime you just committed than be put on the case yourself and be the prosecutor, and then have a good friend of the Clintons be the judge. Can you see how easily this is done? And that it was all at the residence. This wasn't done at the office. This was done after hours. So as you can see, I mean, just think of another case in a city where the same thing could happen when somebody's murdered, and all of a sudden we hear the town folks saying the cops are crooked, the district attorney's crooked, we have crooked judges. And everybody's like, oh, no, they're not like that. This is proof positive that it started early on. And these are the types of programs, the type of people that the Clintons have been putting into place across the United States for decades. And this is why we're seeing our crime rate. This is why we're seeing people get away with committing murder. They figured it out. They figured it out here, and they took it to Washington, D.C., and now they're playing it out for all of you. Except for it's not about Kevin and Dawn. Now it's other people. And um, so when they were at the Judge Cole's residence, like I said, this wasn't at the office. So now, how about keep in mind that at this point, Dan Harmon is the only independent lawyer, not working for the county or the state. He's just a simple lawyer. And he gets put on as a special prosecutor with not even working for the state at all. He was obviously well connected enough to John Cole, who was the judge presiding over the grand jury, also the grand jury, also the judge in charge of anything that had to do with the boys that was brought before him, and that were investigating Kevin and Don's murders in 1988. To let Dan Harmon be the special prosecutor and lead the grand jury also, while having his good friend, Saline County Deputy Prosecutor Richard Garrett, his partner on the case. And so let's go to like Richard Garrett's appearance on Unsolved Mysteries in October. With individuals with tips that call in and they see from the FBI investigation. And we've seen that in 1994 on certain documents. They say after the murder, this murder was aired on Unsolved Mystery, Harmon put Richard Garrett in charge of all the leads, and individuals would call in with information and formal statements. The problem is there was individuals that were calling in, and they were telling them that they didn't know what they were talking about. They would be threatened if they knew anything or sounded like they were from Arkansas and seen or heard or could be a witness. They were threatened. Get this, they even had their phones cut off. They had their houses searched. They were drug out into their yards by FBI agents in the middle of the night in their pajamas. Sound familiar? Yeah. And so they would keep their mouth shut. Imagine that. So after Unsolved Mysteries aired their episode in 1988, witnesses were calling and getting threatened over the phone. And threats over the phone weren't the only things that started happening. From an FBI document, we can see that Keith McCaskill, only a month after Unsolved Mystery show aired, he was murdered on November 11th of 1988. Keith McCaskill was on the tracks that night. He was also named by another witness as being at the tracks that night when Kevin and Dom were killed. And a couple days later, although McCaskill would be the first to be killed after airing of Unsolved Mysteries, he was actually the second witness to be killed. And we'll meet with the first here in a bit. And the beginning of the grand jury's investigation in April of '88, despite two witnesses in the grand jury into Kevin and Don's being killed. The authorities refused to link those killings to that of Don, of McCaskill. It was a witness in the Bryant train deaths investigating. Although the police haven't ascertained a motive for the murder, they say there was no connections. Now, this investigation into the deaths of the two boys, I don't foresee anything in pursuance of the rest of this investigation. That would be anything to make me change my mind. What I mean by that, folks, is I knew McCaskill was out on the tracks that night. He was seen. He talked about it to friends and family, and it was shortly after that he was one of the first to die. Um, and so, a couple months after Keith McCaskill was murdered, a witness in Kevin and Dan's case was I'm sorry, Greg Collins, who was killed in January of '89, who had been subpoenaed by the grand jury to testify in regard to the deaths of the boys. Prior to testifying, Collins was murdered. 3 months after Greg Collins' murder in '89, Jeff Rhodes was murdered, and he was out on the tracks that night. He was found dead in a trash dumpster located in Benton, Arkansas. So you're starting to see the pattern here. It continues on. 3 months after the murder of Jeff Rhodes, Richard Winters was murdered in July of 1989, and what the FBI describes as a setup death. Then we can see the in 1994 investigation where it says surrounding this case at least 6 murders with possible links. And then we see an FBI document dated November of 1994. The FBI states Unsolved Mysteries is currently running an old film clip, which was made shortly after the boy's death. And on the tape are Danny Allen, Richard Garris, Curtis Henry, which was this episode that that we just now talked about, because there was 2. There was a second episode of Unsolved Mystery um, that showed Kevin and Don's case featured Richard Garrett, not Danny Allen or Curtis Henry. So anyway, the FBI goes on to state, in light of a possible law enforcement cover-up, it is requested that the FBI remake the tape of Unsolved Mysteries to replace the current tape running, because they started seeing that there was certain things mentioned in the first one that was starting to incriminate those police officers or those around the case might have been involved. And the version that we've just talked about, the remake, we know there were certain things removed, because the part of where Richard Garrett is asking individuals to call in with tips, it was removed. And as far as we've been able to look through over and over again on it, that was really the only thing that was taken out. And so it's been playing around the country as reruns. It just, you kind of got to search for it. And I find it very interesting in '94 that the FBI would want to remake Unsolved Mysteries. So was it possible law enforcement cover up was mentioned about Danny Allen and Richard Garrett as well? And not only that, but this is the same document that we saw Murder on the Tracks. And if you watch, I believe it's, let's see, it'd have to be part 2 of Murder on the Tracks. Like I said, you can find this Carnage on Ice, and it would be Murder on the Tracks part 2. It talks about Officer Danny Allen's polygraph. And so basically, we saw things pertaining a lot to Unsolved Mysteries on both episodes. So, we all went running and watching and listening really close. And that Richard Garrett had appeared on this show requesting that individuals with tips call in. And then we found out, of course, with the remake, the tape, we also saw the 9 months that followed the original airing, that less than 4 people connected with Don and Henry's case, and another are murdered themselves. We also saw the FBI state that point out the investigation that there were 6 murders with possible links. So what do you think of like Richard Garrett? Let's see if I can get a picture of him for you guys. Okay, so this is Richard Garrett right here. Um, so if you ever watch the Unsolved Mysteries with the Boys on the Tracks, and maybe you'll catch something, maybe you'll catch something that we didn't, a tip or a, a line or something that could help. And so Richard Garrett, at one moment he seemed like he was all for us, and the next minute it seemed like he was almost sabotaging the case as we were trying to uncover and try to show the police officers, the same people that were all on the track, were trying to show them, hey, all these 6 people dead, they're all connected with the case. They all heard something, they all seen something. And why can't you connect them? And they said because it was done in different places and it wasn't all done at the same time. So you can imagine a parent's nightmare hearing this, that we've got some information, we got some evidence, and they're saying, well, if they're not killed in the same place at the same time, they're not connected. They wouldn't even look at it. And of course, when they said that, when we went back to get the documents, all of that's all blacked out. You know, um, they would give us 80 documents, and there was 60 missing. They would give us 100 documents, um, and we would see there's 180 missing. We'd get 200 or 300 pages, and 1,000 would be missing, and or they would be blackened or a white page. We actually got one that was a totally white page. We've gotten them where they were totally black pages. Um, so to get these police officers to really even look at the case back in 88 and 89, or even Richard Garrett, um, we just couldn't get past, we couldn't get past them. They would, yeah, 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 the boys were killed. And they would always go back to, weren't they smoking and laid down on the tracks? Um, so there was a sworn affidavit in 1988 with Richard Garrett's talking about a witness of another unrelated case, where drugs were planted on him by Kirk Lane. Now, Kirk Lane, I've mentioned him a few minutes ago. He was in between the two gentlemen. Kirk Lane, he was a former member of the Benton Police Department. And as we see with Richard Garrett, signed that a sworn affidavit on September of 88, witnessed by a public notary. Um, and I find this document to be very interesting, and I'm sure um, of the good people in the state of Arkansas might as well too, because those who don't know Kirk Lane, he's currently the state drug director, um, put there by Governor Asa Hutchinson, someone else that was part of the Clinton party. He was Attorney General for the Clintons for quite a few years. But so Kirk Lane is now our drug director for the state of Arkansas. We call him the drug czar over the dispensaries. And so you see, he's never been charged, and he was there that night, and he is basically one that was seen that had killed the boys. And we see Richard Garrett a little bit later on, um, to look at Kirk Lane and have a look at what some of the documents say about him. And an Arkansas State Police report dated October of 1988, ironically, was written the same day as airing of the first episode of Unsolved Mysteries. And the report was detailing information concerning the 2 boys who were killed on the railroad tracks at Bryant. And there were physical descriptions of the following. And each of the asterisks, besides the name of Kirk Lane, was J. Campbell, denoting a quote, most dangerous, end quote. They were listed in FBI paperwork as most dangerous, end quote. And there was a photostatic copy and a photocopy of this paper and a report. but can we get it? It's buried in all the files. I mean, I would have to dig through hundreds and hundreds of pages of files to pull out one or two sheets here and there. I suggest if you really want to go and dig, all of um, the documents are at idfiles.com. And there's a place where it has all of the documents. Everything I'm talking about tonight is from there. Now, I've got more because I spent a longer time with um, Linda Ives, and she did give me a lot of her files that they were able to have a lot of the information moved. What I mean by that is we would get something in 88 or 9, it would be blackened out. And then we would get it again in 94. Well, they didn't quite black out all of it. So we started picking up names and information to where we started putting the story together. Um, who decided to redact these years apart was somebody different every time. And did they look at the past documents? We don't think so because we found out little bit by little bit on who did what and why. And we started seeing that Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell, who was Lane's good friend and a partner. Now, mind you, these are gentlemen that hung out, um, and this is verified by Charlene Wilson, that they all used to go to the Clinton Mansion and party. And you remember I was telling you about that, where the cocaine just flowed and they would pile it up on tables. And did Hillary know about these parties? We hear not. Um, so, and I don't want to get too far down the line of Charlene Wilson just yet. Um, so we now we know that they're friends. They hang out with the Clintons. They're all they have beer together after work. They go and have a drink. They go to each other's house. They watch the games together. And who else do they do that with? None other than Judge Cole. And know that the most dangerous, and beside the name of Kirk Lane, where it says um, um, killed the Bryant children, being investigated. Okay, so what it said is the name beside Kirk Lane on the document. It said kill the Bryant children, be an investigation, and there is this written statement given by a witness in a later investigation. I believe in which the witness states Kirk Lane is the keys to the boy on the tracks. And you can tell it's a different person as the handwriting is different from the person writing the second statement. It's consistent, and their T's and their H's and their written B's are completely different. Anyways, I just thought I'd point that out. So when you consider the Arkansas State Police report was written on the same day as the airing of Unsolved Mysteries, um, that very at least yet another one of the coincidences, many of them that we see throughout this case concerning Don and Kevin. Here's another Arkansas State Police report drafted on June 20th of 88. It was also written before the Unsolved Mysteries episode, and we didn't hear anything about it on the show. And it is in one of the witnesses, Ronnie Goodwin, stated, I observed a police car in the driveway to the grocery store. There were a couple of officers pushing subjects up against a telephone booth. I pulled off the road um, by some tracks and watched while the subject was laying on the ground, not moving, and another officer was standing off to the side of the car. I could not tell as much about the officers except the one that was pushing the subject against the phone booth. He was about 200 pounds, 6 foot tall, and sort of a long brown hair, wearing a white or light colored shirt. And as I stopped my car, I saw them pick up the boy off the ground and throw him into the back seat after putting the boys in the back seat of the car, they drove off to the top of the mountain. I guess about 3 to 5 minutes later, they came back down and drove past. And where I was sitting, I did not see the boys in the car at this time, just a grocery bag or a garbage bag. Sitting in the back seat, then we see another state police report only 3 days later, detailing Ronnie Goodman's witness account. And it states Goodwin left Gigi's, and which is a store, and was traveling home. Um, um, I'm sorry, when he left Gigi's, I believe that is a bar. He was traveling home, driving south on Highway 111 when he saw two men he believed to be police officers with two teenage boys and what he believed to be an unmarked police car and the parking lot of Miller's Groceries. He estimated the time to be approximately 2:30 a.m. And going to the second page of the document, one of the men described as the larger two dressed in a white pullover shirt and blue jeans was seen pushing the teenager, a white male, against the phone booth. Another teenager was kneeling on the ground between the phone booth and the police car. And a second man, Goodwin believed to be a police officer, was also standing over the teenage boy kneeling on the ground. And one watch as the man in the white shirt pushed the boy against the phone booth several times. Then both men loaded the boys into the back seat of the car and crossed Highway 111 and proceeded east along Shobi Road, and he provided information by drawing a map which detailed the location of his vehicle and the relative location of the grocery store and phone booth was. So the information will be provided, um, they said, as a diagram. So when we went and looked, we did find the diagram. So there was this police report. So we know it is true. Um, And while this report doesn't name names, it's pretty apparent, and the information does reveal, especially when taken into consideration, the next couple accounts we're going to look at. And yet, Arkansas State Police report about a year and a half later, on February 1990, the report details an account by a club owner, Mike Crook. Um, Now, before I get into that, there might be a question. Why was everybody going to the state police? Why wouldn't they go to where it occurred, the Saline County or Alexander? Well, they had tried, but they were turned away. And we find that with many people that were witnesses. If they tried to go to their local Alexander or Saline County or Bryant, to any of the police officers, once they heard it was about this incident, they were put into an interrogation room. They were locked in there for many hours. Then they would go in and tell them they didn't know what they were talking about. So it got to where a lot of witnesses were going to the state troopers. Now, this was what I was getting from the sources I had. Lassiter, for one, that's what he was telling me, is, when you got crooked cops and in a city, that you're not going to get nowhere. You have to go elsewhere. Well, when you have an attorney general that works for the governor, and the governor is the one that's being looked at, then of course you're not going to get anywhere with your attorney general. And at that time it was Asa Hutchinson. And he's our governor now, if you guys are wondering. And he has been a good friend of the Clintons for a very, very long time. He runs as a Republican governor. We don't know why. And Hillary does give him political money every year, just about. And on years that he needs campaign money, she definitely makes big contributions to him. So, so now we got a club owner, Mike Crook, who was incarcerated at the time, and he was relaying what he had been told, that he pretty much said the exact same thing that Ronnie Goodman did, only he saw a little bit more, namely that Kevin and Don approached the grocery store, whether you want to call it Miller's or the branch grocery store. They were accompanied by a third boy on a motorcycle. Now, that would be Keith Coney. And we can see that the report says that the boy in the motorcycle, Keith Coney, rode off. And of course, we know that Keith Coney was one of the witnesses for the boys, and he was one of the first ones to be killed. And a minute after he rode off, an unmarked police car pulled up, and two men in plain clothes got out. And Jerry, that was a witness, was telling Mike Crook about what he saw, and that one of them was Kirk Lane because he used to work for the Benton Police Department. And the other guy he didn't really know, but he thought it might be Jake Campbell, and being the taller of the two. So he definitely knew who Kirk Lane was because he used to work with him. So he seen him on the tracks that night. Not only that, but he said about Campbell being there too. Well, because he knows he's part of the police department. He knows these guys. He knows what they look like. So there's nothing. Now you can see why they didn't want to take the reports for this witness alone, because he could point out what was going on, and point out the two people that they didn't want to be known that were out there on the tracks that night. And so these two cops got into an argument, and the two cops ended up beating the boys unconscious, is what he says. And they threw them into the car and drove off further down the road. And it states before that Keith McCaskill was killed over this. And remember, the second witness murdered in the grand jury started in 88. The first witness was killed after the unsolved mystery. So Keith McCaskill told Crook that Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell were the Pulaski County Sheriff's officer, were following him around, and he was afraid that they were going to kill him. So he confided in this other cop that he was afraid that these guys had been following him around and they were going to kill him. And of course, he ended up dead. Now, the other bunch of coincidences, let's have a look at the boy who rode off on the motorcycle. And the FBI document, it doesn't really tell us much, but it's redacted. And we see over time when we started seeing names and things come up, one of the final ones we were able to see is that Keith Coney, he's now deceased, was listed as one of the first witnesses in the boy's case. And he and to get killed on May 17th of 88, just weeks after the grand jury were looking into the boys had begun. And despite of all of the redaction, his name is listed among others surrounding the boys, including 4 guys that were killed soon following the first episode. And Keith Coney's mother, and what she had said, that he said he didn't think it was an accident because he was fearing for his life. And he said a couple of months before, he had went to his mother a few times. He went to a friend's. He went to his mother a few times and said he knew the two teenagers were run over by the train. And she said he indicated to her that he had been there when the boys had died, and he spotted the attackers, and he knew who they were. And he knew the two that were there. And she said when he almost was going to tell her, he then got very quiet. And she tried to get him to say who it was. And she said either he was too afraid or he was just being silent, or maybe he really didn't know. So things that are said there, I don't think it was an accident because he was fearing for his life. And a couple of months before that, he said a couple of times he knew people that told him that he was being watched and to warn him. And he was afraid. So Keith Coney started fearing for his life a couple months before he was killed. And this happened within a couple months. Yes, he was. And when we look at the grand jury, um, and they looked into the murders of the boys, it was officially started in April of '88. That's less than a month before Keith Coney's death. Mrs. Alexander said her son knew the two teenagers, that their boys had died, and that he spotted the two attackers. Um, so, stating that the two boys walked up to the grocery store, and also he was with them on the motorcycle, and he said that was why that he would possibly be killed. Well, when his mother kept saying, "Well, who did this?" and he said, "Well, I can't say because there was things that was going on that night." And she said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, the three men, the cops that confronted us, it's because we were smoking a joint together and I didn't want to get in trouble." And so he said he rode off really quick on his bike when the police car pulled up. And he said so he left them there. So he thought the boys were getting in trouble for smoking a marijuana joint and getting caught. So yes, the boys did smoke marijuana. The boys did have it in their bloodstream when the autopsy was done, but it was a very minute amount. Um, so Jerry, who gave the information to the crooks, um, basically that one of them was Kirk Lane, and it matched Ronnie Goodman's statement, and it matched the others. So let's not forget that he said he was being followed. And so the Arkansas State Police saying that Keith McCaskill told Crook that Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell were following him around. So that verified that what Keith Coney had said was actually true. Um, and I don't mean to be going in circles, but it gives you guys the idea of exactly what they were doing after the fact of the boys, and how no witnesses, there can't be any witnesses. And so if we go, if you guys go over to idfiles.com, it was created by Kevin's mother, Linda Ives, and Gene Duffy. And we're going to go over a lot of what Gene Duffy had to go through, because we really believe that Gene Duffy is the connection from the drugs to the Clintons, and that the boys were happened to be in the middle of all of this in the wrong place at the wrong time. Anyway, we see where another state police report corroborated with Crook's statement about a third boy, Coney. So there was an interview with Joseph Clark Farmer, a friend of Eugene and Keith Coney. And being Keith's father, Farmer said that he was talking to Eugene Coney about the boys long after they were killed. And he said the cops killed the boys. And he said basically he could see where Phyllis Corrin, um, uh, FBI Phyllis Corrin, could see by a letter to the FBI. Um, she When she started getting the first few documents of what was going on with the boys and who some of the witnesses were, she did write a book about it. And um, so basically her book is what started the media and the police to become even more fearful that there was a lot more witnesses out there than they thought. And um, not only that Keith Coney, but another young friend, Daniel Burden, he went missing in March. Supposedly, he had seen something, and he had been told something. And they've never found Daniel Burton. Only a few articles of his clothing that an anonymous caller called in to the police department, the one that we never can get around to or they don't answer. Well, they answered this phone call and said he had been murdered and his body dumped in the Arkansas River and to check it out. Well, Daniel Burden just happened to be a friend of Greg Collins. And I mean, so how obvious is this that there's an interrogator from the FBI and knows basically what is going on. She starts interviewing some of these extra witnesses, and one by one, they're all coming up dead. And so she started looking at this information, and she started looking into the fact, you know what? This is, there's a lot of deaths going on around these boys. And so she started looking into who she could get to put into place that can get to the bottom of it. And of course, when you've got corrupt cops and a crooked DA, special prosecutors, you're just not going to get anywhere. And of course, then we had, if you remember, the two Welch and I can't remember the other guy's name. The FBI guys that finally came in and started looking at this. Well, they started. She started talking about it to the FBI and these two in law enforcement guys, and they started implicating that Kirk Lane and his partner Jay Campbell were basically could have been part of the boys on the tracks. But it took us till 2007, folks, to even get anybody to even look at the documents. And this was put back in there in the late to almost 1990. And we couldn't get nobody, even with the FBI writing top officials, the Senate, Congress, and they were doing hearings. Nobody would look at this until 2007. And that was, it's just unbelievable. Now get this, the same year that all of this stuff started coming out in 2007, well, Jay Campbell seemed to have a really bad drug problem again. And he ended up being sentenced to 40 years in jail for drugs, racketeering, among other charges. So we could see that in 86. Now, if you guys remember Dan Lassiter, you remember that? He was one of Bill Clinton's financial backers. He's a close friend. He knew all of these guys. Well, he was letting the cat out of the bag about this cocaine distribution. And he was advising that Jay Campbell's friend, Kirk Lane, he said, he's known both of them since they were 13, 14 years old. And they had been friends all along. So you could, here we go again. We've got the buddy with the buddy with the buddy. And this is what we were dealing with. And, when it was rolling into the 2000s and we still hadn't had a conviction with the Clintons, you can imagine the Ives and the Henrys, these parents that are just shaking their heads going, how come it's so easy? It's just a couple cops that did bad things. I mean, wasn't it a cop that did bad things to George Floyd? I mean, it's got to be easier than this to get just these two cops. And that was the one thing that we never could understand is it's just a couple of bad cops, that's been in the police department. It's not like they're really somebody. But then as you dig, you find out they were somebodies. These guys were, what was it said in one of the documents? They're dangerous. Yeah. So we didn't know anything about this. And so when they did the documentary Obstruction of Justice in 96, they could see in the court decision that neither Campbell or Kirk had an alibi for the date of the Don Henry and Kevin Ives' death. And the case, their sworn affidavit from Harmon who at the time of the boys' murders, there was a guy that Harmon was friend with. His name is Herman Reeves, and he was a constable at the time and a justice of the peace. And he said, "Let's have listen to of what some of the witnesses have said." And they kind of said, "No, no, no, let's not go there." And when he started realizing, this Herman Reeves, what was going on with Jake Campbell and Kirk Lane, he started realizing when he was going through the documents that there was a little bit more to this. And there was other people with Harmon and Kirk Lane and Campbell that night. They say at least 4 other people. Um, and then they said with the group of kids that was there, at least 6 kids ran away, and the boys were trying to call from a phone, a few of them, but when all of these officers chasing these boys, um, at the time of when the drop was made and the shots were fired, the boys scattered, the cops that were there on the track, it was pretty crowded. There was 10, 12 people there, plus 8 to 10 boys. So you're talking over 20 people out on the tracks that night waiting to see who was going to steal the drugs. The boys were going because they were curious. And yes, it is now found out through the documents that they did hear about it. And they were just going to go look. Um, and of course, they didn't see anything. So they were going to go ahead and go squirrel hunting. Well, then, of course, um, there was the drugs that was fixing to be dropped. Then they seen the boys on the tracks. The boys fled. They caught them at the grocery store where they were just sitting there, smoking their weed. And so then they pulled them into the car because those were the 2 boys that they did see that were on the tracks that happened to be watching Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell and Harmon. Now, my thing was when I got to this point, folks, with this investigation, I said, okay, so they seen cops on the track. Big deal. That's what any of you guys would think is big deal. So there's 2 boys walking down the track and they see a couple of men on the tracks. What is the big deal? Nothing that no one heard planes. No one heard any type of helicopters, cars driving, but there was 4 or 5 vehicles out there hidden in the woods with these guys wandering around the tracks. So why did they have to kill these kids? Why? Because they were afraid of what had been seen. And the story of the drug drops and it being tied to the Clintons would be a huge issue. The Clintons had just went to D.C. They didn't need this drama or drugs to be basically them drugged back into after they just got through getting over Barry Seal. So, um, so basically, when the gun that was grabbed up by the officer, he grabbed the 22 around, grabbed the 22 away from the boys, and he swung around and he hit Kevin beside the head with a sharp blow, knocked him unconscious at that point. So notice he mentioned Harmon as being on the tracks. Well, that is Dan Harmon. And soon there's another affidavit from that Campbell Lane had a lawsuit against Pat Matriciana, and it was signed by Linda Holcomb, and who was a retired Arkansas State police officer with 30 years experience, and states that Linda Eyes gave her copies of what she identified as the investigative reports that contained the Arkansas State Police file of the Henrys murdering, meaning the stack of documents approximately 8 inches high, hundreds and hundreds of pages. Um, It was interviews that were conducted during the investigation. And what we think of all of these hundreds of witnesses, these are hundreds of pages and hundreds of witnesses that seen something, heard something, or heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend. So they really had to shrink it all down. The problem was it was the same story over and over again. It was the same guys on the track. There was a few more added too as it went along. So you'd think that Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell, through the various reports and testimony, that they would go and get them, right? The Arkansas State Police would have at least turned it over. Well, no, they didn't. They just covered it up. Um, More and more, they just kept the files in Washington. They kept the files at the Rose Law Firm. They kept more files or very little evidence at Saline County Sheriff's Department, where all of this evidence should have been. And so Arkansas State Medical Examiner, this is the one that a lot of us don't like, Family Malik. He was the one that ruled that the boys had smoked 20 joints, fell asleep on the track. And so when they started looking at it, and they brought in this other coroner that basically had said there had been a fight. One of the boys had been shot. One of them had their head bashed in. Then we started seeing Family Malik's testimony and his documents starting to fall apart. And so not only that, but Don Henry's T-shirt had been analyzed by expert pathologists, and there was tears in the fabric, like it had been cut by a knife, and they also found stab wounds. So this is why. Now, when you look at all this evidence I just told you about, all the statements, all the witnesses, all of this, this is what was put before the grand jury. And now you know why, when they said it, when they first looked into it, and the judge was kind of doing a poll, which he shouldn't have been doing. He was privately asking how it was looking and how the case was going. They said maybe. But when they went and asked again, and they said, probable, we're going to go after these two cops. Well, that's when he stopped. He dismissed the grand jury and sent them on their way. That is Judge Cole, the good friend of Bill Clinton. So as you could see, that's the first parts of the case that were being looked into. So there was people and others that they had look and analyze a lot of the evidence. He had another coroner. They had private investigators. That they brought in so many to look at this case, and they would all kept coming up with the same thing. That these boys were placed on the tracks. They were, their head was beat in, they were stabbed, they were shot, they basically beat up, and then they were laid to die on the tracks. And a lot of them discovered what appeared to be evidence of the stab wound on the original autopsy. Was basically told by Family Malik. He told his assistant, don't put that in there. Don't put that in there. So it was found by the second coroner. And he refused to comment after all of his stuff had been exposed. And the fact that he had misrepresented quite a few cases. But not only that, he was the coroner for all of these other witnesses that had died. And he made up some really crazy stuff. If you didn't hear about Family Malik, I did it on a few shows ago. But watch The Boys, The Murder on the Tracks, and you'll get a good dose of who Family Malik was. Interesting was the black T-shirt with the tears on the sides, and they were linear cuts on the back. And they thought that it was most peculiar that um, the crime lab advised that there was a possibility of that um, the second coroner wanted to do more, considering a lot of the tests. But when it was presented to the Saline County sheriffs and the prosecutor, they closed it down. They said nope, nope. They weren't going to go ahead and let Cox do any of this. So the chance to do any further tests were not completed. And so, um, and I don't want to dwell too much on the stabbing and the shooting and their head being bashed in. It's just a lot of lying done by quite a few of these officers. And withholding evidence or destroying evidence or a lot of what they had done at this time is very illegal. And so the more that we put in for the Freedom of Information Act, um, the more we had Jocelyn Elders. She was starting to interfere and started, it was almost like protecting the Clintons. We had Family Malik protecting the Clintons. And she was even agreeing that the boys smoked 20 joints and fell asleep. But her and Family Malik got big, huge raises, and they were swooped off and taken to D.C., never to be heard from again. So uh, when we get to uh, what are Bill Clinton's thoughts of the whole situation? Um, we were all saying this dude needs to resign. And he said he couldn't, that he was a fine coroner, that there was no need to be hasty on bad judgments on maybe one case. Of course, or he said he didn't know anything about it. That was the Bill Clinton's always his. He didn't know anything about it. He hadn't seen the documents. He sent the money for this to be looked into, and the money was never received. Um, he said he read documents, but he didn't believe that the witnesses were correct. Or he would even lie and say the witnesses were caught making false statements to the FBI, which was never true. But now you could see where they can just lie to the media, and the media believes it, and the media runs with it. Well, that's what they did here. They were so ooh and odd of Bill Clinton here. A lot of the media, he had them, whatever he said went. They believed him. They thought he was really good and very truthful. So, of course, he hit, and not only that, but by then they had bought out pretty much the media. So the media were only going to tell what Bill Clinton wanted them to say. And so, um, and I don't want to go too much longer in this because I got a lot of info here. Um, so was kind of like the beginnings of the cover up of the investigation. And um, when we have Garrett was focusing, um, that one of the biggest thing we were looking for was that green tarp because it was seen by the railroad workers. And of course, we went after Garrett. And all of us were kind of focusing on that green tarp. And neither boy owned the tarp. The other thing was the 22 rifle disappeared. It was never to be seen again. So, but witnesses said that when they were beating one of the boys with it, that it struck the ground and it shattered. So of course, if they can't let the parents have the gun back, and of course the gun disappeared. The tarp disappeared. This is when we started seeing quite a bit of evidence start missing out of the evidence boxes. We started seeing documents that were once there, weren't there. And of course, they were sent to Washington. They were sent to the FBI. They were sent to the CIA. And this was um, a secret state-run investigation. And of course, look who all was in place of it. So now they were bringing in DEA agents to kind of look into what was going on with the drug trade because it was getting out of hand. And of course, we're hearing drug drops, and there shouldn't have been because Barry Seal is long gone. Well, every time they would bring in a DEA agent, well, they would start looking into the case, and they started realizing that Bill and Hillary Clinton, well, with this Mina and the cocaine and Barry Seal and the boys and this drop was all kind of connected together. And it wasn't until they got in a lady DEA, and where she started sending her own investigators out and having them look into it. And it's ones that she trusted. Um, um, she trusted a lot. And they were coming out with the same thing. They kept saying that there is this disagreement between the DEA that FBI guys that were working with them, and people in the state troopers that had didn't care much for the Clintons. So all of them were working together, and they were all coming up with the same thing. It was the same scenario, the same story over and over and over again. It was the drugs that were going to Iran Contra drugs, and it went to Barry Seal. Then it went to uh, the little planes in Mina that were dropping drugs all along the valley in certain areas. And why were they doing that? It was because um, they couldn't use the Mina airport because of Barry Seal. So they found what they could do is have another airport. And some say it was in Louisiana, some say Florida, and some say there was another small airport in northern Arkansas that they were using. So instead of using landing at the airports and getting caught, what they would do is they would load up at certain airports, and then they would drop it along the valley. And then, of course, that's where rumor had it that there was drugs being dropped in that certain areas. And of course, local teenage boys are going to go look, and so that's what they did. And so when the DEA guys were finally uncovered this is when we really did get our first um, set of information and true facts and documents that we connected that all together, that the boys were a part of what was going on with the drugs. And so um, when we got in the last one, um, she and her family started getting threats, and she was told if she didn't shut up, she was going to lose her job. And so she started investigating it behind their backs. And then when she started getting stuff together and she got a bunch of documents together, they pretty much threatened her family, and she had to flee for her life to Texas. And if it wasn't for her helping Linda Ives out, she's kind of a hero, folks, because she's the one that's pushed this through with Linda Ives and a few others. Um, and and I hate to cut this right about now. I think it's getting good. um, but so now get this. So what we had to do, we had to connect um, what was going on with the drugs. We had to connect it that this is what the boys were walked in on, and the connection to the Clintons. And see, at this time, all we had was um, um, what we had was uh, that the boys wandered onto something, and the boys were maybe got in with some. We heard drug lords, we've heard cartel, we've heard everything, but what we were finding out was okay. The boys, if they did wander into something, well, who's dropping the drugs? And we were so naive, folks. I can't believe how we were so naive to think that when Barry Seal was done, it was done, and it wasn't. Um, and so When she finally fled, she had a bunch of documents, and the three to four guys that was working with her, they were basically eliminated. They were moved, they were transferred, or they quit, they resigned, they got the hell out of there. And why not? Um, and then we started seeing people like I told you about Terry Reed. We started seeing all of his info coming in about what was going on with the FBI going after him. So we have got all these witnesses at this point now that are fear of their lives. We've got DEA, head DEA agents that are fleeing Arkansas in fear. We've got her employees running for the hills. They're scared. Everybody that knew anything about this case at this point, and this was getting into about 1990, 91, 92, where we seen everybody just, it was silenced. Everything went quiet. And it wasn't until I'm thinking 1994 when we started really seeing everything starting to pick up again. And it was, no, why would it? Why would it? Well, it's because um, Jean Duffy, she's the one that's the DEA lady, she went back home and she said, you know what, doggone it, I'm going to get this out. And they started just digging, starting from the very beginning and going through every single bit of evidence they could and looking at every document. Because if we were going to prove that these cops did these killings, and even to prove that they killed more, we were going to need a lot of proof, folks. We were definitely going to be a lot of proof. Um, and so, um, and I say we because, um, we knew about what the Clintons did here, but we never expected they'd murder anybody or order the murder of two young boys. But you know what? They had to go. No witnesses. If they would have found out in 92, now think about this, folks. If we would have exposed them in 92 for what they had done and what happened here, you think they would have made it into being a president and first lady? Nope, nope. There was a lot to cover up, and there was a lot to shut up, and there was a lot of witnesses that had to go. No witnesses, and everything had to be shredded. And so that's where you start seeing the shredding, the witnesses, and everything just starting to go really south. Not really for us because we knew we were connecting the dots. And the more that there was a witness that came forward and they ended up dead, it was like, there we go again. And then we'd get another one. It would be someone that worked at the police department, someone that worked at the Justice Department, or an FBI agent looking into it. And boom, 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 they're dead too, within days after finding stuff out. And it was like, we were getting up to 20 and 30 and 40, and we're like, this is Arkansas. Yeah, we were the original of people that come up with Arkansas because look at what was going on in our own state. We had judges, we had prosecutors, we had police officers, state troopers, um, uh, young boys that just heard or seen something. Were all one after another, after another, after another. So who was killing these people? That's what we wanted to know. If it's all connected with this, if it's all connected with just two boys on the track that night, we needed to find out what was going on. And so next week, um, I'm going to get into further, but I think next week, I think either next week or the following week, I'm going to have Rendy come in because she's looking into Jean Duffy, or she has been looking into her. And this woman's a hero, folks, because once she got back into town and she had her big box of evidence, and we started looking through it piece by piece, and we had people that were willing to actually look into it for free or for very little, more and more started coming undone. The problem was these guys were growing in power. Um, a chief of police, or we hear Harmon. Harmon, I hate to. Is it Harmon or Campbell? I'm sorry. Um, there's a lot more that's into this, folks. Um, Harmon. When Harmon started getting arrested for his drug uh, problems, it wasn't just once. He was 3 or 4 times. That's how he ended up at 20 years in prison. Not for the boys, though, for drugs, cocaine, and he was selling cocaine. But then we started hearing that he was dabbling in little girls. And when we found out that he had been around Lassiter, this is when I started, um, well, not when I started being able to talk to Lassiter in 98. And I started asking him about it. And that's when Lassiter started telling me that there was a gentleman. Um, he said it was something Steen, and he says he's well known. He's a very rich man, and he's coming here for little girls to take to his places of residence, and he was prostituting them out like what Lassiter was doing with the 15-year-olds. Well, that's when I looked into it, and it was Epstein. See, this is how I knew that they were doing child trafficking and prostitution because, and then Lassiter admitted this on in a hearing. This is why I know that the Senate and the Congress and that have been around for 30, 40 years, they know about this. They've known about it, and not once have they ever come to a conclusion or followed through with a resolution that would help us out. They've only covered it up. And you've heard me say in the last few weeks about Pelosi knowing about it, and Maxine Waters and Schumer, and quite a few others that have been in power all these years. Biden knows about it. Um, um, Loretta Lynch knows about it. And when Vince Foster decided he was going to put his foot down and say what he knew, look what happened to him. Same thing with Ron Brown. Ron Brown found out about it. Look what happened to him. He's gone. Even when we had people in high places that would talk, or they were going to finally um, tell what they knew and expose the Clintons, they ended up dead. They ended up dead. So, um, anyway, so you guys now going to have to come back next week for the rest of this. I wanted to pretty much get you into what was going on with the boys and how person after person after person was being killed over this. Now, next week, I really want to get into um, where we started seeing more out of the documents and what the documents led to. And that means that the FBI was a lot more involved in this than we thought. So was the CIA, and so was Oliver North. Um, then we started finding that John Kerry was even a little bit in this. And not only that, the same time all this was going on, then we had Nadler coming into the state that was going to be representing the Clintons. Then we had Mueller here. We had Comey here. Uh, all of these people that were in power that have keep covering up for the Clintons. I mean, how many years ago was this with Mueller and Comey and McCabe and all of them with Russia, Russia? Well, I guess you never realized they were all the way back to the 80s and 90s when it was Kevin Ives and Don Henry. So, yes, keep prepping and subscribe. I know that this went by so quick and it seems like I didn't get enough out. But I want to do this very slowly so you guys fully understand that how this can happen now. The Clintons said they were going to take this plan to Washington, and of course they have. And it's like I said at the very beginning, this really shows how a murder can happen in one of these towns, like let's say Chicago. And when you have crooked cops, and everybody's like, there's not crooked cops. Yes, there's crooked cops. Um, there are crooked cops that are willing to do anything for a price or for power. And in Arkansas, with these two boys, it was both. It was for power, it was to go to Washington and become something like Stephakopoulos. What does he face the nation now? Yeah, look at him. He's a big guy now. He used to be a squirrely little punk in the 80s. The ones that everybody at the governor's mansion would complain about because he was squirrely, almost where they say they thought he was going to wet his pants a few times. He was squirrely. He was scared. He had no confidence. He would break out. When we would get close to finding out stuff that they were doing, this man would break out. He would have a meltdown and they'd have to send him somewhere. Face the nation, little guy. Yeah, you would think he's a brave dude. Well, he was a punk back then. And we all think that way here. He didn't do us no favors, and look at where he ended up. So, with that, everyone, subscribe and hit the like button, hit the bell, and hopefully I'll hear something and find out if they're going to take Investigator News 2 from us. If you do not have Investigator News Network, please add us on there, because if they ban me for these shows, because it was one of these Boys on the Track shows they hit me on for, they said misinformation. And I sent them a thing just earlier. I said, you want to see the documents? Yeah. So anyway, over in Facebook, please hit the follow and the likes. And we totally appreciate all of you watching this. And tell your friends and family and share this, because if we're going to stop what's going on with the Democrats, we got to know what they've done before and what they're doing now. And they're putting their people in place. They're putting people in power so they can get away with any crime that they commit. So with that, folks, we will see you tomorrow night for trivia. It's one of our favorite shows. And so you guys have a wonderful Friday night, and we'll continue this next week. And until tomorrow for trivia, you guys have a blessed night. Bye-bye, folks.